Song Yiren's surrender. When the truth finally walked back and the rain began before sunrise, thin and patient, tapping against the city like a reminder that some things cannot stay buried forever. By the time the courthouse lights flickered awake, the air already felt heavy, as though the building itself understood what kind of mourning it was about to witness. At exactly 7:14 a.m., a black sedan slowed at the entrance. Song Yiren stepped out alone. There were no sunglasses to hide behind, no assistants trailing her steps, no hurried attempt to disappear into anonymity. She stood still for a moment, letting the rain settle on her shoulders, then walked forward as if she had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in silence. Inside, the doors closed softly behind her. And with that sound, a story long held together by fear began to unravel. The Yu Menlong case had never truly ended. Official reports claimed closure years ago, labeling the incident an unfortunate convergence of missteps, confusion, and tragic timing. Yet within the industry, no one ever spoke of it with certainty. Too many details refused to align. Too many witnesses remembered differently. Too many questions lingered unanswered. Yu Menlong had not been reckless, nor careless. He was known for his discipline, his attention to detail, his habit of asking questions others avoided. He noticed patterns. He challenged narratives. He pushed when things didn't make sense. That was what made him respected. And some believed that was what made him inconvenient. The night everything changed was supposed to be ordinary. A private gathering. Familiar faces. Conversations that drifted between work and trivialities. But beneath the surface, tensions simmered unspoken, unacknowledged, and dangerously underestimated. When the argument erupted, it happened fast. Voices rose. Accusations sharpened. Power shifted hands in ways that no one present fully understood until it was too late. By the time silence returned to the room, nothing could be undone. What followed was confusion, then coordination. Phones buzzed with instructions disguised as concern. Statements were drafted before shock had time to settle. Everyone was reminded of what they stood to lose. Careers, contracts, futures carefully constructed over years. And so, a version of the truth was agreed upon. Song Yiren was there when it happened. That fact alone haunted her more deeply than any headline ever could. At the time, she had been young, newly successful, surrounded by voices that spoke gently while steering her firmly away from honesty. They told her she was not responsible. They told her it was not her place. They told her silence would protect everyone, including Yu Menlong's legacy. At least that was how it was framed. Her initial statement was brief, carefully worded, and incomplete. She signed it with hands that shook only slightly. When questions followed, she repeated what she had been coached to say. When the story solidified in public consciousness, she let it. Silence at first felt like survival. Years passed. Careers flourished. The industry moved on with calculated grace. Yu Menlong's name faded from conversations, resurfacing only in speculation-heavy online forums and half-remembered interviews. But Song Yiren did not move on. Every success carried an aftertaste of guilt. Every role required her to inhabit truths she had once avoided in real life. Applause began to feel hollow. Praise felt undeserved. At night, she dreamed of unfinished conversations. In those dreams, Yu Menlong never accused her. He never raised his voice. He simply looked at her, waiting, as if the truth were a sentence she had paused midway through and never returned to finish. The pressure intensified when fragments of the case began resurfacing. An anonymous post here, a leaked document there. Old staff members, no longer protected by contracts or fear, started speaking in cautious fragments. Their accounts didn't align with the official version. For the first time, the silence surrounding the case felt unstable. Song Yiren realized then that the truth was no longer something she could keep buried. Someone else had begun digging. And once that started, the story would surface with or without her. The decision to surrender came quietly. No dramatic breakdown. No final confrontation. Just a moment of clarity in the early hours of the morning, when she read a leaked transcript that directly contradicted her original testimony. The lie she had helped sustain was collapsing. She understood what that meant. By the time the sun rose, she had already made peace with the consequences. She contacted her legal counsel and informed them of her intent. She did not ask how to protect her image. She did not ask what could be salvaged. She only asked how to tell the truth properly. Inside the interrogation room, there were no cameras and no theatrics. Just a recorder, a table, and investigators who had waited years for someone to finally speak without restraint. Song Yiren did not rush her words. She described the atmosphere of that night, the tension that had been ignored, the moment when the situation tipped beyond control. She spoke about the fear that followed, not fear of what had happened, but fear of what honesty would cost. She admitted where she had lied. She admitted where she had stayed silent. She admitted how power, pressure, and protection had shaped her choices. With each detail, the case shifted. What had once appeared chaotic now revealed structure. What had been dismissed as coincidence began to resemble orchestration. Names previously shielded by reputations suddenly surfaced with clarity. When the recorder was turned off, the room felt heavier, not because the truth was shocking, but because it had been delayed for so long. News of her surrender broke before noon. The reaction was immediate and unforgiving. Social media ignited. Fans split into factions. Some called her brave. Others called her complicit. Critics questioned her timing. Supporters argued that speaking late was still better than never speaking at all. Within the industry, panic spread quietly. Old alliances cracked. Legal teams mobilized. Statements were drafted and redrafted, each one carefully avoiding the core of the issue. But it was too late. The Yu Menlong case was no longer frozen in ambiguity. It was moving again, propelled by truth rather than control. Song Yiren did not defend herself publicly. She did not issue emotional apologies or attempt to reshape the narrative. She allowed the story to unfold as it should have years ago, without interference. Her surrender did not close the case. It reopened it properly. And somewhere within that reopening, Yu Menlong's name finally stopped being a rumor and started becoming a reckoning. This story does not end with redemption or ruin. It ends with accountability, unfinished, uncomfortable, and necessary. Because some truths do not explode when revealed. They resonate. They echo. They force the world to listen long after the noise fades. And for the first time in years, the silence surrounding the Yu Menlong case was no longer empty. It was honest. The morning of Song Yiren's surrender did not end when the courthouse doors closed. That was only where the noise stopped pretending to be distant. Inside the building, the air felt colder than outside, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Her footsteps echoed down the corridor, steady but heavy, each one sounding louder than the last. Staff members looked up and then quickly away, unsure whether witnessing this moment made them part of it. In a small waiting room off the main hall, she sat alone. Time stretched unnaturally there. Minutes felt rehearsed, looping back on themselves. She studied her hands, noticing how calm they were. That calm frightened her more than panic ever could. Panic passes. Calm means the decision has already been made. Beyond the walls, the first leaks were already escaping. Someone had seen her arrive. Someone had sent a message. Someone had whispered to someone who never learned how to keep quiet. By the time investigators entered the room, the story was already moving without her. They greeted her professionally, without judgment. That neutrality felt heavier than accusation. She followed them down another corridor, past doors marked with numbers that meant nothing to her, into a room that looked too ordinary for what it was about to contain. A table, 3 chairs, a recorder placed carefully in the center. She sat. The recorder blinked red. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence pressed in, thick and deliberate, like the pause before a storm finally breaks. Then she began. She did not start with the incident. She started with context: how the night had been arranged, who had called whom, how it had been framed as informal and harmless. She spoke about the way certain people controlled rooms without raising their voices, how tension could be felt long before it was acknowledged. As she talked, the investigators exchanged glances not of surprise, but of recognition. They had heard fragments of this before from sources who never went on record from statements that ended just short of names. When she finally reached the moment, everything shifted, her voice slowed. She described how quickly confusion turned into urgency, how fear spread faster than understanding. She admitted that she had known, even then, that the story being constructed around them was incomplete. She knew, and she said nothing. Outside the room, the courthouse had begun to stir. Phones vibrated constantly. Assistants whispered behind closed doors. A rumor was no longer a rumor when it appeared in multiple places at once. Song Yiren voluntarily surrenders. Yu Menlong case reopens. Industry shaken by unexpected confession. Each headline grew sharper than the last. Inside the room, the questions deepened. They asked about pressure, about conversations that happened after the incident, about who suggested what, and how quickly consensus formed. She answered without decoration, without trying to soften her role. At one point, the recorder was paused. A glass of water was slid toward her. She didn't drink it. She was already too far inside the truth to step back. When the interrogation resumed, she named names not dramatically, but clearly. Each one landed differently, like pieces of a puzzle finally snapping into place. The case transformed in real time, no longer a tragedy wrapped in mystery, but a sequence of decisions made by people who believed consequences could be managed. When it ended, there was no closing statement, no reassurance. The investigators stood, thanked her, and left the room. She was alone again. Hours later, she was escorted out through a side exit. The rain had stopped, but the city felt louder than ever. Sirens in the distance. Voices rising from clusters of reporters kept behind barriers. Her name floated through the air, detached from her, reshaped by interpretation. That evening, statements were released. Carefully worded, emotionally vacant, urgently defensive. Some denied involvement. Some claimed misunderstanding. Some said they would cooperate fully while saying nothing at all. The industry tightened in on itself, protective instincts kicking in with mechanical precision. And then came the second wave. Former staff members began reaching out to authorities. Old assistants, drivers, production aides, people who had seen enough to recognize the truth now that it had a voice. Each new testimony strengthened what Song Yiren had already set in motion. The story was no longer hers to carry alone. That night, alone in a quiet room far from cameras, she finally allowed herself to feel what she had postponed for years. Not relief, not redemption, only gravity. She understood now that surrender was not an ending. It was an opening, one that would pull in everyone who had helped seal the truth away. Some stories demand to be told no matter how long they are delayed. And the Yu Menlong case, once frozen in silence, was finally beginning to move forward, dragging every hidden shadow into the light, one name at a time.